Hello, friends. Today I want to talk about this past week, it was really just 72 hours, but it felt like a week. My brain was not braining the past 72 hours, and I wanted to share my experience without my ADHD meds. And the goal here is to be real, reflective, and also reassuring. I really want to pull back the curtain and show what this week's experience was, because I know that I have an audience of neurodivergents, also neurotypicals, but I know that there are a lot of people, women who are diagnosed later in life, either ADHD, autistic, or AUDHD like myself. And what's crazy is I almost didn't record this episode because I felt like it wasn't the right one to do after such an on and off week, but honestly, that's exactly why I needed to record this episode. Welcome to UGC Pro, the podcast where creative strategy, UGC innovation, and freelancing success collide. I'm your host, Kelly Rocklein, a self-taught creative marketer from the brand and creator side, with over a decade of experience working with hundreds of brands and driving over $500 million in revenue. Now, as a mentor to more than 10,000 aspiring UGC creators and creative strategists, I'm here to help you unlock your full potential. Whether you're here to sharpen your ad game or gain fresh insights to elevate your creative freelance business, you're in the right place. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, or habit stack. Is there a pile of laundry that you need to get through? What about unloading the dishwasher? Maybe it's a good time to go out and get some fresh air. Whether you're cuddled up on the couch or getting your steps in, I am so happy you're here. So without further ado, let's dive in. I was unable to refill my ADHD meds on Sunday. I had my last two, which was 20 milligrams. Prescription at the time was 20 milligrams, taking 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon. And it wasn't the extended release. It was just the normal Adderall. I don't know what else to call it. I wasn't able to get it refilled until the 16th, which is today, but I was ready to have it refilled by Sunday, which was the 12th. So I went the 13th, 14th, 15th, and part of the 16th without my medication. But the reason why I ran out prematurely was because I was actually taking my medication the wrong way. I didn't know this, but I thought the pills that I was taking were 5 milligrams each because that's how I started out. But turns out my prescription changed last month. Each individual pill was now 10 milligrams, which meant I should have only been taking 2 a day, but I was taking 4 a day because I thought 5 times 4 was 20. But really, I was doing 4 times 10 is 40. And the crazy thing is, I didn't even realize I was taking double the amount of my new medication amount because it wasn't hitting, which I figured was a sign in and of itself for me to meet with my psych this week, which at first I was kind of annoyed about because I had already driven 3.5, 4 hours to and from Portland. So 7-8 hour trip to meet with my psych annually in person for God knows whatever reason. And I say that because I vented about this on my story earlier this week, and it's so annoying how accessible things like vapes, alcohol, cigarettes are to anyone. I was buying alcohol when I was in high school. It is so easily accessible, yet it has to be so complicated, all this red tape to get a hold of Adderall, which is so frustrating because you can get a DUI while you're driving drunk. You could kill someone. You could have manslaughter. You could just not be in the right state that you literally end up just committing a crime. There are so many things that can happen when you're taking alcohol, when you are smoking vapes or cigarettes, yet Adderall is the controlled substance because, God forbid, the neurodivergents are able to function in a neurotypical world. That vent session is just going to end there, and we can pick it up at the Recovering Sad Girl episode that we launched in January of 2026, which, if you don't know what Recovering Sad Girl is, it is a podcast that I'm going to be launching in Q1 of 2026, talking about my experience as someone with AUDHD, autism, and ADHD later in life diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28, 29 years old. Actually, I was diagnosed with autism at 30. So it wasn't until 2020 that I started to realize that there's something wrong, there's something not right. I started to experience extreme levels of depression and anxiety. And honestly, if COVID didn't happen and the world didn't halt overnight, I don't think I would have gotten the diagnosis that I did in the time that I did. So anyways, that entire podcast is going to be dedicated to talking about my experience as a woman who was diagnosed later in life with, again, AUDHD, autism, and ADHD. And it's not just going to be me talking. I'm going to be having guests on who are going to provide resources. So I want to be able to talk about topics that are intertwined with this diagnosis, such as PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric dysphoria, I think is what it is, or RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which this podcast is RSG, Recovering Sad Girl, which is a play on RSD, which is something that I experienced very strongly during my PMDD phase of my cycle, which is 2 weeks out from my period. I feel like being able to launch this podcast while also having the UGC Pro one and kind of cross promoting it with my audience makes the most sense. So stay tuned for that. I will link the teaser for Apple and for Spotify and for YouTube if you guys want to check it out. Make sure to follow, turn on post notifications. That way you can be notified when I launch episode 1, January of 2026. I'm beyond excited. I'm going to be working on this with my longtime work wife and friend, Danielle McCord. She is a former producer at QVC, turned direct response creative strategist and producer. I've worked with her in multiple different cases. We were both working at Mute 6, the agency where I met Shayna, and then I brought her over to 310 when I was a creative director. And before that, I brought her over to another boutique agency where she was an executive producer. To be able to do it with her, I'm very excited. So stay tuned for that. Okay, yeah. So this week was a struggle. I wasn't able to refill my ADHD meds when I ran out. Again, I ended up taking the wrong amount. And funny enough, it was because I didn't realize I was doing this. I had been taking anywhere from 1 to 4 every single day, which I was supposed to be doing anywhere from 1 to 2 every single day. You know what's funny is I look back on last week and how I was able to pump out the Pitch Yourself PR Power Hour within a Monday to Friday window. Go figure. It's because I was taking 4 of them a day. I was taking 40 milligrams, but you would have thought I would have noticed because the first time I ever took Adderall, I felt like I was transforming into some sort of superhuman. And the fact that I was able to go from 20 milligrams to 40 and not consciously be aware of it was kind of the wake up call that I had where I was like, okay, my psych wants to meet this week. And at first I was kind of annoyed about it because I literally just met with her less than a month ago. But the fact that I didn't even realize I was taking 40 milligrams is telling that I need to probably switch up my meds, which if you are on any sort of medication for your ADHD, you understand that medication alone is a journey in and of itself. When I first started this journey, I was initially diagnosed with anxiety and depression. So I was taking Lexapro and eventually Wellbutrin. I felt like overnight my anxiety and depression was, for lack of better words, eradicated. It was amazing and incredible. And I just felt like I was on top of the world. But at some point, a year and a half in, I realized that my ADHD symptoms were only getting stronger and more obvious because of my anxiety and depression no longer being the primary focus. That was really just taking all of my energy and focus. So that's when I started to dabble with Adderall with my psych support. And honestly, I was doing 5 milligrams and it was amazing. It was hitting. And then a few months later, I kind of was like, okay, might need to take 5 milligrams later in the day as well, just so I can have consistency with my energy levels. And then that is when I met with my psych in person in Portland. And at the time I was telling her, hey, I'm doing 10 and it really isn't hitting. So then she was like, okay, let's go to 20. And then crazy enough, again, between then and now, I somehow managed to go up to 40 and it wasn't hitting, which also makes a lot more sense why the withdrawals were stronger because I literally went from not 0 to 100, but it sure probably felt like it from a bodily level going from 20 to 40 milligrams, which at least made me feel a whole lot better knowing exactly why Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were so challenging to just get anything done during the day because my body was where did those 40 milligrams go, girl? You went from 40 to 0? You don't do that generally. And the fact that I had to literally go 72 hours without my medication is insane to me. And before I go any further, I really appreciated the conversation when I opened up on my story the other day, which was Wednesday, October 15th. Today I shared what was call outs of people messaging, sharing their personal experiences. One person's message specifically stood out to me talking about how she feels that it's ableist to have to every single month go back to your doctor and ask for a refill of your stimulants when you literally have ADHD. That is one of the things that we struggle with the most are admin tasks, keeping up with things, remembering. And it's just, I completely agree. She took the words out of my mouth. It feels extremely ableist and frustrating. And then not only that, but I'm messaging my psych on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, basically begging her. I feel like almost a drug addict, but I have to remind myself that if your body can't produce these chemicals, the store-bought version is more than just fine. And if anything, the system is so messed up that I'm over here begging to get my prescription. And granted, hopefully this never happens again. And this could have obviously been prevented if I read the prescription prescription and realized that the pills I was taking were no longer 5 milligrams and that they were 10 milligrams. So if you have not gone a few days without your medication, you probably haven't experienced this yet, and I'm glad you haven't. But if you do, going without my stimulants, it affected my ability to function as a human being. I did not feel motivated. I had extreme brain fog, and I had major analysis paralysis. So go figure, when I'm able to get my prescription filled Thursday morning, like I felt this major sense of relief, and like contrast when I finally was able to get a hold of this dang prescription. It honestly felt like my spark came back. Like when I tell you I wasn't able to get any work done this week, I mean it. Like I did not come out with my YouTube video. I didn't start working on a podcast episode until getting my medication today, which reminds me the medication I'm now on is extended release. So I'm doing 30 milligrams extended release. And then she also put in a prescription for 10 milligrams of the normal kind if I ever feel like I need like an extra wind at like 1 or 2 p.m. But funny enough, I actually forgot to pick up that prescription. Go figure, which is like another reminder that it's so funny to me that this prescription, Adderall, Vyvanse, it's all so like heavily protected and there's all this red tape. And it's like, yeah, the people that are taking these stimulants, they're forgetting to pick them up in the first place. They literally need it and they know they need it. And like there are other situations where it was a federal holiday and I kept pushing it off to go pick it up. And I knew that the pharmacy was going to be closed on that day. I think it was like either a Friday or a Monday. And I literally didn't pick it up, even though I very well knew I was going to be forced to go a day without it because of the executive dysfunction and just like paralysis that I found myself in. So it's like, yeah, this Adderall is like so dangerous and it needs to be protected. But like the literal people that are taking it that actually need it are also forgetting to go pick it up in the first place. So I wanted to dedicate some time talking about the realities of ADHD and entrepreneurship. So there's this duality. It is an absolute gift. We have creativity, intuition, ability to hyper-focus on what lights us up. But the challenge here is executive dysfunction, inconsistent dopamine, and burnout cycles. So why so many neurodivergent people end up working for themselves, which this is actually a thing and studies prove it, is because it is difficult for us to function in traditional structures. It is difficult to deal with micromanagement and having just like general rigid expectations that are pushed on ourselves. And it's like crazy because it's like we have this gift, you know, this creativity, this intuition, this ability to hyper-focus on things that get us very excited, which is why we're very passionate about whatever it is that we're offering as a service or product we're selling as an entrepreneur. But at the same time, you also struggle with executive dysfunction, inconsistent dopamine, and just like burnout cycles, which is an issue in and of itself. But if you were to be working in, say, corporate America, you would have difficulty with traditional structures, with micromanagement, and just general rigid expectations. And like we have this need for autonomy and flexibility to flow with energy and focus cycles that corporate America does not offer us. The desire to build systems around how we work best instead of forcing ourselves into neurotypical frameworks is like something that ends up actually becoming a huge barrier when working in corporate America. And it's unfortunate because the people that end up having like, you know, shorter experiences at a job are oftentimes neurodivergent people, people who are autistic, people who have ADHD. And it is so ableist, in my opinion, when hiring managers. And this is something that I dealt with whenever I would do interviews when I was still working as a creative director in corporate America, was they would always say, oh, well, you've never stayed at a company for like more than 3 years. And that's a red flag to us. And like now that I understand the studies that prove that neurodivergents are actually the ones that end up having shorter spurts, shorter times at their jobs, wherever they're working, like tell me that's not ableist. I do what makes sense for me. When I'm like working, like I treat the company that I'm working at as if it were my own business. And so in order for me to be the most efficient and effective at my job, like I'm going to create systems and workflows that are going to let me make the biggest impact without spreading myself too thin. And it's unfortunate, but because we have this need for like autonomy and flexibility to flow with like our energy and our focus cycles, that is oftentimes met with more traditional structures like being micromanaged or having these, again, rigid expectations pushed onto ourselves. And this is exactly why like we are so built for entrepreneurship, but at the same time, we also have to make sure that we are being self-aware of like preventing burnout cycles as much as possible, recognizing that, you know, if you're a woman with ADHD or autism, you could very well be experiencing PMDD 2 weeks out from your period. For me, 2 weeks out from my cycle, I have to be very self-aware of what it is I'm working on, because when I tell you I can flip on a dime and become so frustrated, angry, sad, my emotions are so amplified because of the PMDD. And I remember before I knew what it was, I would explain to Shane and I would say, I can't put my finger on it, but what I can say is something feels off on a biological level. And unfortunately, the absolute worst case scenario for PMDD is having, certain ideations and having extreme depressive cycles. And this was something that I was dealing with. Like, is there something wrong with me? Realistically, there was never anything like quote unquote wrong with me. I just wasn't self-aware of the fact that, like, again, women who are ADHD, autistic, oftentimes experience things like PMDD, like RSD, and like to be self-aware of it is so important. To be able to have the time and space to like give yourself is something that you can really only experience as an entrepreneur. And even as an entrepreneur, you don't even get that much, time, freedom, or flexibility if you're in the building stage, because like, yeah, we also live in a capitalistic, neurotypical society where I have bills to pay. And as much as I want to prevent burnout, I also have to make sure that my rent is paid, whatever it is. Like, we have so many responsibilities. Best case scenario, you're someone that is neurodivergent and you're an entrepreneur and you're able to build a business that makes you money and offers you the time and space and flexibility to be able to build systems and workflows that make sense for your neurodivergent brain. But unfortunately, like, if you are in corporate America, that is extremely limited. And then generally, even when things are good, the downside here is when your systems break. I have built systems that make sense for me. I've left corporate America since August of 2023. I have only been getting more and more self-aware with myself, more and more in tune with myself. But again, like weeks where I go without my meds. What exactly does that feel like? I felt lazy. I felt like my brain's browser had 47 tabs open and none of them would load. I felt so frustrated knowing that I needed to get stuff done, but I was unable to start, let alone see something through to the end. And not only that, but I felt guilty. And I was having this like constant self-talk like spiral of, oh, well, you should be able to push through this. And it's like, let's discuss these barriers that I was experiencing. Executive dysfunction, task paralysis, emotional dysregulation, PMDD symptoms, because I'm literally a week out from my period. When your mental load gets too heavy, even small things can feel impossible. Like for me this week, I wasn't able to actually do like what I consider money-making activities, which was very unfortunate. I did laundry, organizing my office. I cleaned up my closet. I unpacked. I literally hadn't unpacked for my last trip, which was the last week of August. I have so many plans for like the Pitch Yourself PR Power Hour video course that I just launched. I have so many things that I'm excited to work on now that I just offloaded one of my creative strategy clients. I'm dedicating Q4 to be able to build a firm foundation for UGC Pro's next steps going into 2026. And it all goes back to I was not able to do anything remotely related to any of that during the past 72 hours. Again, my brain felt like it had 47 browsing tabs open and not a single one would load. I wanted to prevent frustration that would be amplified by my PMDD symptoms, knowing that I need to get this done and I'm unable to start, let alone finish this task. I didn't even want to open that can of worms. And honestly, this kind of reflects growth. And I'm trying to find the positive in this situation. And one of them is being self-aware enough to know that, hey, I'm a week out from my cycle and I know that I've been feeling my PMDD symptoms. It feels almost amplified because I'm not getting my dopamine hits from my Adderall that I was just cut off of, going from 40 milligrams to 0. Yeah, no duh, this week I experienced major executive dysfunction, task paralysis, emotional dysregulation, PMDD compounding symptoms. Yeah, my mental load, it felt so heavy that I could only do specific things like cleaning, organizing, etc. And then really quickly, I wanted to go back to the realities of ADHD and entrepreneurship. I found some studies that I found were super enlightening. So studies suggest that people with ADHD traits are more likely to intend to become entrepreneurs and engage in entrepreneurial action, which makes a lot of sense going back to what we talked about. It's like corporate America is way too rigid. We need to have more autonomy, which the entrepreneur route makes the most sense. There was another study by the West Virginia University where researchers found that ADHD brains may be wired advantageously for entrepreneurship, being better at capturing environmental stimuli and using them strategically. Fast Company covered that adults with ADHD are 3 times more likely to start a business compared to non-ADHD peers, pointing to how traits like risk tolerance, urgency, and flexibility often align with entrepreneurial work. A systematic review on neurodivergence in the workplace showed that neurodivergent individuals face no notable barriers to employment and retention, which can push many toward entrepreneurship or self-employment. This is definitely something that goes back to even like the interview process and hiring managers. Like I specifically remember interviewing with this one agency. They are very well known. They're in LA. And I remember the hiring manager being like, well, you're perfect. You check all the boxes. You would add major value to the company. But the red flag here is that you have never stayed at a company for more than X amount of years. And it's like crazy because looking back on that now, I'm like, dude, that is so ableist in my opinion, which is funny enough, a huge reason why I ended up, becoming an entrepreneur is because when I lost my job August of 2023 because the entire company was laid off, I just remember being like, I am not going back through these rounds of interviews to be told that I haven't worked at a company long enough when like literally my reasons for prematurely leaving companies at whatever time had to do with pain points that I was experiencing as a neurodivergent person being forced to work in a neurotypical environment, which then goes into unemployment and underemployment rates. So some sources estimate that up to 85% of autistic adults are unemployed despite willingness and qualifications. And then neurodivergent adults face much higher unemployment than neurotypical peers. Estimates vary, but rates around 30 to 40% have been cited in some contexts. So that's obviously like the downside of being neurodivergent is experiencing higher rates of underemployment and unemployment. Now, when we talk about, fit over fault, ADHD traits, think impulsivity, novelty seeking, hyper focus. This aligns with founder and like startup life more than rigid corporate structure. This can be seen as both a negative and a positive, but obviously when you leave the corporate space and you go in and work for yourself, all of a sudden your impulsivity, your novelty seeking, your hyper focus, this is what you want as a startup or founder. Also having autonomy and flexibility, they are not just luxuries for neurodivergence, they are survival tools when your brain works differently. And I think that's really important to emphasize. Many neurodivergent people lean entrepreneurial because of the constraints of corporate settings. So think rigid processes, micromanagement, neurotypical expectations, often suppressing your strengths, which is something that I felt all the time. And I was not able to put a finger on what it was I was feeling. Literally, when you work in a neurotypical workplace and you are forced into this rigid workflow, you're being micromanaged, you have these neurotypical expectations pushed on you. Ironically, they are suppressing your strengths as a neurodivergent by simply trying to squeeze what I'm saying is like, say you're a square and they're trying to squeeze you into a circle. Think of those toys where like as a kid, it's like, I put the square in the square hole. I put the circle in the circle hole. Neurotypicals are literally trying to squeeze you, a square, into their circle. And it's like, that just doesn't work. It doesn't. And you're suppressing the neurodivergent strengths, their superpowers that offer major value to your company, to your agency, etc. And it's all just because you're like, well, no, you have to do it this way. Even though ADHD and autism is a disability or a neurodifference, it is important to emphasize that this is not a character flaw. You deserve patience, you deserve compassion, you deserve structural accommodations, literally for yourself to exist in a neurotypical world. Unfortunately, that isn't always an opportunity or luxury that is offered to a neurodivergent in the workplace, which again is exactly why being an entrepreneur is honestly the best option for neurodivergence. This perspective is going to help reduce shame and internalized pressure. We have these common experiences on a regular basis, like executive function, task paralysis, emotional dysregulation, PMDD, and hormonal interactions. So if you're listening and you're like, what are these words? Executive dysfunction is difficulty organizing, initiating, planning, and sequencing tasks, even when motivation is present. Emphasis on when motivation is present. You're not lazy, you're excited to do it, you have difficulty organizing, initiating, and again, planning, even when the motivation is present. The to-do list, it's known, but starting or staying consistent is really, really hard. And then there's task paralysis, the feeling of being overwhelmed by what to do first, such that nothing gets done. So all options feel way too big or a little too vague to get started. So you're left literally feeling overwhelmed, not by a task you're working on, but trying to figure out what the heck to even work on first. And then there's emotional dysregulation. So reactivity to stress, small frustrations triggering intense emotional responses, difficulty modulating mood or recovering. For me, before I knew that I had ADHD, I struggled so hard with emotional dysregulation. And this is something that I've really doubled down on prioritizing because it has just made me a better human by being self-aware of my reactivity to stress, how I would get frustrated and triggered and have these intense emotional responses, having difficulty managing my mood or recovering from, say, an outburst. It has made me a better working professional. It has made me a better manager. It has made me a better spouse. It has made me a better daughter. It has made me a better sister. It has made me a better person by being just aware of this emotional dysregulation, this common experience that we have as people with ADHD and or autism. And then there's PMDD or hormonal interactions. There are women out there who have hormonal cycles and they can actually be exasperated with ADHD or autism symptoms. So for anyone that was assigned female at birth and have these hormonal cycles, this can actually be exasperated by ADHD or autistic symptoms, making focus, mood, energy, executive function, and other things even more volatile. I didn't find a single study combining what is PMDD, ADHD, and business work, but I can speak from lived experience. It is beyond challenging to be an entrepreneur who is regularly dealing with their ADHD and then 2 weeks out from their cycle, PMDD and RSD symptoms. And I want to reemphasize, ADHD and autism, they aren't challenges. They are legitimate disabilities in certain contexts. What many people don't realize is that the brain difference that gives us strength also come with systemic friction. It's okay to need extra grace, structure, tools, or even pauses. So when your system breaks, it is often not even your fault. It's your brain's wiring. You'll hit executive dysfunction, task paralysis, emotional overload, hormonal crashes, but knowing that gives you the power to design your workflow, creating your systems around this. That way, then you don't have to beat yourself up because there is nothing that is going to make the situation more shitty, for lack of better words, than beating yourself up, especially when, again, it is a legitimate disability in certain contexts. And a big part of my journey has been, again, treating my brain like it's different, but not deficient, creating scaffolds like checklists, buffered timelines, bare minimum fallback plans that accept those breaks instead of shaming them. Now, before I move further, I do want to talk about some of the PMDD symptoms because it is definitely something that is still not talked about enough. That said, I do think the conversation around women's health has gotten more and more prevalent since 2020. But unfortunately, when we have things like, say, certain administrations that are defunding women's health, when it's literally women's health is already so understudied, we're already decades behind and now we're probably going to be a century behind if we don't start reinvesting into women's health. And it's honestly really frustrating because when you think about it, I'm pretty sure it's 80% of people with chronic illnesses are women, and yet our health is not studied enough to begin with. Fast forward and the new administration coming in and just slashing any type of studies dedicated to women's health is just beyond frustrating. As someone that is we need more studies. We don't need less studies. We've already been deficient of these studies. But so what is PMDD? It is a severe form of PMS. But it is not just PMS. It is a hormone-based mood disorder that affects the brain's sensitivity to hormonal fluctuations, especially during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, so about 1 to 2 weeks out before your period. PMDD is not about being moody. It is a neuroendocrine condition, meaning it is where your hormones and brain chemistry literally clash. So when we talk about common PMDD symptoms, these symptoms, again, they usually appear 1 to 2 weeks before your period and then ease or disappear once your period starts. They can impact your mood, your body, your energy, and your ability to function as a person. And so I want to talk about how it often shows up from an emotional and mental perspective, physical perspective, and behavioral perspective. So when it comes to emotional and mental symptoms, we have severe mood swings, feeling fine one moment and suddenly sad, angry, or hopeless, irritability or rage, reacting strongly to small things, often out of proportion, depression or hopelessness, feeling emotionally heavy, worthless, or unlike yourself. When I would try to explain it to Shane before I knew what PMDD was, I would tell him, I'm having all these symptoms and I can't explain it other than something feels off on a biological level. I do not feel like myself 1 to 2 weeks out from my cycle. And then there's anxiety or tension. So a sudden wave life of panic, racing thoughts, or tight chest anxiety, overwhelm, and brain fog. Even small tasks feel impossible. Mental clarity, it disappears. Loss of interest or motivation. Things you normally really enjoy feel dull or pointless. Like sometimes Shane will be like, well, let's get out of the house. Let's go do something. What do you want to go do? And I'm like, dude, I just want to sit on this couch and just exist like the floating, depressed, anxious, angry, sad orb that I am right now. And it's like, what kind of value is that gonna add to my situation? None, but I have a complete loss of interest and motivation to do absolutely anything. And then emotional sensitivity. So rejection, criticism, or conflict feels especially painful, which is where RSD, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria comes into play. Now, for physical symptoms, there is fatigue and low energy, sleep disruption, so either too much or too little, headaches or migraines, breast tenderness or bloating, appetite changes or cravings, joint or muscle pain. And then for behavioral symptoms, there is withdrawing from social interaction, impulsive decisions like spending, quitting, emotional texting. Anytime I've ever just been like, F this shit, I'm done, I'm packing up everything, I'm leaving Shane, I'm leaving the animals, I don't even know where I'm going, but I'm gonna go. The only time that thought has ever crossed my mind is when I'm literally in the trenches with my PMDD. So like impulsive decisions for no other reason than your girl's hormones are all over the place. Difficulty focusing, working, and communicating clearly. One thing to keep in mind, many ADHD and autistic women, they experience heightened sensitivity to hormonal changes, which again is going to amplify those PMDD symptoms. Estrogen and progesterone fluctuations affect dopamine and serotonin. So those are the same neurotransmitters tied to focus, motivation, and regulation. The same ones that ADHD meds target. This means the week before your period, your executive dysfunction, your emotional dysregulation, and sensory overwhelm can all spike. You might feel like you lost your ADHD meds or can't access your normal capacity, and it's not in your head. It is a literal chemical. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I have really come to understand that PMDD and ADHD can tag team in the worst way possible. For me, it's like every symptom of ADHD gets turned up to a 10, where I can't focus, I'm irritable, I'm emotional, my emotional regulation goes out the window, and my brain feels like it's moving through literal mud, like it's a slug. That's because PMDD isn't just emotional, it is neurological. Your brain chemistry literally changes during that phase of your cycle. So if you are neurodivergent and you're a woman and you feel like you are losing all of your progress once a month, you are not broken. There is nothing wrong with you. You are just dealing with a double whammy of brain chemistry shifts, and it deserves compassion and not shame. And if you are a woman that experiences this, you are one of the few. So from what we know right now, PMDD affects 5 to 8% of women. But that said, studies do suggest the number may be much higher among those with ADHD or autism, and also because of the fact that women's health is just so understudied and so underinvested in, we can only imagine. Like, I don't know. Should we like times that by 5 or by 10? Probably. Some research suggests that up to 50% of people with PMDD meet criteria for another neurodevelopmental or mood disorder. And then when it comes to treatment options, now you can kind of do like a mix of it. Think like lifestyle and diet adjustments, SSRIs, which I'm on Lexapro. I'm actually trying to wean off of it. I say trying, but I haven't started actually. I'm a little nervous about the brain zaps. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll definitely have a conversation about this on the Recovering Sad Girl podcast. And then hormonal birth control or progesterone suppression. What sucks is like I, for whatever reason, am like terrified to take birth control. I know that obviously people have shared horror stories about it, gaining weight, wild acne, losing their hair, etc. I don't know. For some reason, even though I'm pro medication, the idea of taking hormonal birth control makes me nervous. But if I were to try anything, I would probably look more into the progesterone suppression route. And then cycle tracking to plan around your low energy weeks. And this is something that, I've loosely implemented into my workflow. Cycle syncing. Mostly it's having the self-awareness, understanding, and compassion and patience for myself those 1 to 2 weeks out from my cycle, and knowing like, hey, what do I want to work on this week? What is going to be the path of least resistance? And how do I prevent a potential mental breakdown? All right, so we talked about the realities of ADHD and entrepreneurship, the downside of when your systems break, and now I want to talk about the turning point, reclaiming energy and perspective. The moment that I got my prescription, I felt immediate relief. Shane calls it a placebo. Immediate mental clarity as soon as I took this pill, and then feeling like my spark was back. And I couldn't describe it other than it felt like my brain was being tickled. Like I felt the dopamine rushing through my body, and I was just like, holy crap, I haven't felt this feeling in within 72 hours, it felt amazing. I reflected on what that contrast taught me, how dependent productivity can feel on chemical balance, which stinks because it's if you can't make it yourself, if your body cannot produce these chemicals, store-bought is just fine. But it stinks when the store-bought is being withheld from you for whatever reason. So the lesson, it's not about being fixed, obviously. It's about giving your brain what it needs to function at baseline, at the neurotypical level, and to have compassion over shame, and the importance of designing a workflow that anticipates what could be weeks off, like batching content, being flexible with deadlines, and again, having these bare minimum days. This is something that this moment really taught me, that I do need to design a workflow that does anticipate for potential weeks off, because as confident as I am that this situation won't happen again, in the sense that I'll make sure to read my new prescription, make sure I'm taking the right amount, and then I'm actually taking, say for example, the 20 milligrams as compared to the 40 and running out early. I can keep all this top of mind, but what I can't control are times that the medication is out. This is something that people with Vyvanse and Adderall prescriptions have been dealing with and struggling with for multiple decades now. I cannot control if they run out of Adderall. And if they do, how will I function as a human being in late stage capitalism? And so this situation really reminded me of the importance of designing a workflow that does anticipate these weeks off. I haven't really sat down and thought about it much, but in my mind, immediately it's batching content, being flexible with deadlines, and having those bare minimum days. And, when I think about why this conversation matters and why I even wanted to bring it to the table for the UGC Pro community and not the recovering sad girl community, which again, I do believe I'm going to be kind of cross-pollinating the audience, just because the majority of my audience are women that are entrepreneurs, and go figure, the women are the ones that are getting diagnosed later in life, the ones that are thriving most in entrepreneurial environments because of their ADHD and or autism. Regardless, I wanted to open up this dialogue because many creators and freelancers are neurodivergent, and we are masking burnout behind productivity. I want to normalize conversations around mental health and how it impacts business, our emotions, our mental, our physical health. Again, this is exactly why I'm creating Recovering Sad Girl, a space for late diagnosed neurodivergents to feel seen, supported, and to get practical tools from experts and lived experiences. If you are having one of those weeks at any point, I want to reaffirm, you're not broken, you're not lazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You are a human. You need to rest, you need to refill, and you can then come back when your spark returns. And in this case, when your medication is refilled. And if you made it this far, first off, thank you so much. This episode was not about strategy or pitching for UGC or performance creative in the least bit. And it was about being honest about the reality behind all of that in the days where your brain just will not brain, for lack of better words. If you have ever felt broken because of your ADHD, your autism, your PMDD, or any other neurodivergent struggle, I hope this episode reminded you that you are not lazy, you are not crazy, and you are definitely not alone. I had a tough week, but I made it through. And if you're listening to this right now, you did it too, which means you are already doing better than you think. The biggest thing I've learned is that you don't have to fix yourself to do great work, and you just have to learn to work with your brain and not against it. The moment you start doing this, will offer the path of least resistance. So here's your reminder. Take your meds, refill your prescription, give yourself grace, and build systems that love your brain back. If this episode resonated with you, please, please, please share it with a friend. Tag us. I want others to know that these resources exist. And stay tuned for next week's episode. We post every single Friday, and if I fall behind, I always make up for it. So just stay tuned. I am so excited to open up conversations that are needed to happen in the first place from here on out. I just felt like this conversation needed to be had because behind every strategy, behind every UGC concept, there is a human, there is a brain, and sometimes that brain needs rest before it creates. The fog always lifts, the spark always comes back. You just have to give it space to find you again. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the UGC Pro podcast. I hope today's episode gave you inspiration and practical steps to apply to your business. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit follow, leave a review, and share it with another creator or marketer. And make sure to catch our next episode. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say you will not want to miss out. Until then, remember that success is a strategy and you are your most valuable client. So treat yourself like it. And lastly, if you aren't already connected with us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X. Look up UGC Pro and be sure to follow along. And as always, I wish you the best of luck on your UGC and creative strategy journey.